Hello everyone, welcome back to Buried Files. Tonight we bring you 7 deeply disturbing true countryside horror stories that will make you reconsider ever seeking solitude in remote places. These are not works of fiction, but genuine accounts from individuals who experienced the unthinkable in areas where help is miles away. And darkness hides more than just wildlife. Every story you are about to hear has been compiled from direct witness statements, corroborated by those who lived through these events, and cross-referenced with available records to ensure their legitimacy. The countryside may promise peace and escape from the chaos of modern life, but it also harbors terrors that civilization has learned to avoid. If you crave authentic horror content rooted in reality that will challenge your sense of safety, subscribe to Buried Files and activate the notification bell so you never miss our investigations into verified encounters with the unexplainable. After you experience these 7 disturbing accounts, share your own countryside encounters in the comments below, because we know many of you have stories that deserve to be heard. Now settle in, turn off the lights, and prepare yourself as we venture into the isolated horrors that wait in the countryside. I received the call from my uncle's estate lawyer on a Tuesday afternoon in late September. The voice on the other end was professional, but carried that particular tone that attorneys use when delivering news that will fundamentally alter your life. My uncle Raymond had passed away 3 weeks prior, and I was apparently the sole beneficiary of his estate. This struck me as odd for several reasons. The most significant being that I had not seen Uncle Raymond in over 15 years. Not since my father's funeral when I was 19 years old. The lawyer, a man named Garrett, explained that the estate consisted primarily of a property in rural Montana, approximately 200 acres of cattle ranch land with a main house, several outbuildings, and what he described as various agricultural structures. He emphasized that I needed to visit the property within 30 days to take formal possession and sign the necessary documents, or the state would begin proceedings to claim it. The way he said it made me suspicious, as if he were warning me about something he could not explicitly state over the phone. I am Logan. I work as a data analyst in Seattle, and my life is dominated by spreadsheets and client meetings. The idea of inheriting a cattle ranch felt absurd, like receiving the deed to a spaceship. But 200 acres of Montana land had value, even if I planned to sell it immediately. I took a week off work and drove the 14 hours to the address Garrett had provided, watching the landscape transform from urban sprawl to endless highways to finally the kind of remote countryside where cell phone signals ceased to exist. The property sat at the end of a gravel road that seemed to go on forever, winding through pine forests and across dried creek beds. When the main house finally appeared, I felt a strange mixture of relief and unease. It was a large 2-story structure, white paint peeling in the mountain weather, surrounded by weathered fence posts and overgrown fields. What struck me immediately was how well maintained everything appeared despite my uncle having been dead for weeks. The grass was cut. The driveway was clear of debris. Someone had been taking care of this place recently. I parked and approached the house with the keys Garrett had mailed to me. The front door opened with a creak that echoed across the empty land, and I stepped into a home that smelled of wood smoke and something else I could not identify. Something organic and unpleasant. The interior was sparse but functional. My uncle had lived simply. A worn couch faced a television that looked 20 years old. The kitchen was clean but outdated. Everything suggested a man who lived alone and wanted little from the world. It was in the study that I found the first indication something was wrong. My uncle's desk was covered in documents, all neatly organized in folders labeled with dates going back 5 years. I sat down and began reading, and what I discovered made my hands shake. Uncle Raymond had been keeping detailed records of vehicle traffic on his property. Not the main driveway, but apparently on some access road I had not yet discovered. He had documented license plate numbers, times, descriptions of trucks and vans, all arriving late at night, usually between 2 and 4 in the morning. The entries were meticulous. November 12, 2019, white panel van, license plate MT47A2. Arrived 2:47 a.m., departed 4:15 a.m., 2 occupants. Page after page of similar observations, sometimes multiple vehicles per night, sometimes weeks between entries. What chilled me was the final entry, dated just 2 days before his death. They know I'm watching. Need to call sheriff tomorrow. Have enough evidence now. God forgive what I think they have been doing. But there was no indication he ever made that call. According to the death certificate included in Garrett's materials, Uncle Raymond died of a heart attack, found in his bed by a concerned neighbor who had not seen him in several days. Natural causes. The kind of death that does not trigger investigations in a 73-year-old man with a history of heart problems. I spent the rest of that afternoon exploring the property with Uncle Raymond's documents in hand. The main barn was empty, except for old farm equipment rusting in the shadows. But behind the barn, barely visible through overgrown brush, I found a dirt path wide enough for vehicles. Following it on foot, I walked nearly half a mile across the back portion of the property, through a section of pine forest, until I emerged into a clearing I had not known existed. There stood another structure, a large metal building like an airplane hangar, completely hidden from the main house by the topography and tree line. This was not marked on any of the property maps Garrett had provided. No windows. A massive sliding door secured with a heavy chain and padlock. The ground around it was packed earth with tire tracks still visible. Recent tracks that could not have been more than a few days old. I did not have keys for this building, but the chain had rusted enough that 20 minutes of work with a tire iron from my truck broke it free. The door rolled open with a metallic screech that seemed impossibly loud in the silent countryside. I used my phone's flashlight to peer inside, and what I saw made me stumble backward. The building had been converted into some kind of processing facility. Industrial steel tables lined one wall, all equipped with drainage systems that fed into large barrels. Plastic sheeting hung from hooks on the ceiling. A wall of freezer units hummed with electricity, somehow still running. The smell hit me then. The same organic wrongness I had detected faintly in the main house, but concentrated here into something that made my stomach turn. I forced myself to move deeper inside. The tables were clean, recently scrubbed, but the drainage grooves were stained dark. The freezer units were locked. But through the frosted glass doors, I could see dark shapes inside, wrapped in plastic. My mind tried to rationalize this as a butchering operation for cattle. But nothing about this setup matched legal agricultural processing. No inspection permits on the walls, no business licenses. And the size of those wrapped shapes in the freezers was wrong. In a corner office, I found more documents. These were not my uncle's careful observations, but actual business records, hidden in a filing cabinet. Invoices for processing services, with amounts in the thousands of dollars. Names I did not recognize, but all with local addresses. Some of the invoices had notes written in the margins. No questions. Cash only. Dispose of everything. The true horror began to crystallize when I found a cardboard box pushed under a desk. Inside were personal effects that had no place in an agricultural facility. Wallets, identification cards, a child's worn stuffed animal, items that belonged to people, items that should have been with their owners. I counted 11 different IDs, all belonging to different individuals, ages ranging from 19 to 64. Some of the photos showed people smiling at birthday parties or graduation ceremonies, frozen moments of lives that had presumably continued beyond these snapshots. But Uncle Raymond's documents told a different story. Cross-referencing the names on the IDs with local missing persons reports I later found online, I discovered that 7 of these individuals had been reported missing over the past 5 years, all last seen in communities within 200 miles of this property. The others I could not trace, which somehow made it worse. People who had vanished without anyone even filing a report. My uncle had not been running this operation. He had been documenting it, building a case against whoever was using his remote property for something unspeakable. That access road ran along his property line, technically on his land, but clearly used without his permission by people who thought an elderly recluse would never notice or care what happened in his back acres. I was standing in that office, trying to process what I should do next, when I heard a vehicle approaching. The engine sound grew louder, multiple vehicles actually, coming down that hidden access road toward the metal building. I had left the door open. They would see it immediately. Panic is a strange thing. It clarifies thought even as it destroys composure. I grabbed the box of IDs and my uncle's documents and ran to the back corner of the building where the shadows were deepest. There was a service door there, half hidden behind stacked pallets. I slipped through it just as I heard truck doors slamming in the clearing outside. Voices carried in the evening air. 3 men, maybe 4, speaking in casual tones about cleanup and the old man's nephew, and whether I would be a problem like the old man was. Someone laughed and said that heart attacks were convenient, especially when you knew which medications to replace with the right kind of pills. My uncle had been murdered. They had poisoned him slowly, disguised as a natural death, because he had been preparing to expose them. I crouched behind a pile of discarded lumber 20 yards from the building, holding my breath as the men entered. Through gaps in the wood, I watched them move inside, carrying equipment and boxes. They were methodical, professional, people who had done this many times before. One of them commented that the chain on the front door was broken, and they needed to find out who had been there. Another voice, older and with an authority that suggested leadership, said they knew exactly who it was. Uncle Raymond's nephew from Seattle. They had friends who worked at the county office who had alerted them when I filed the inheritance paperwork. They knew I was here. They knew I was staying at the main house, and they would deal with me the same way they had dealt with my uncle if I had seen too much. I remained frozen behind that lumber pile for over an hour while they worked inside the building, discussing their operation with the casual indifference of people discussing any business. They processed products for several clients throughout the region, people who needed certain problems to disappear permanently. The remoteness of Uncle Raymond's back acres made it perfect. They had been paying him a monthly fee for years, or so they thought. What they had not realized until recently was that he had been documenting everything, planning to take his evidence to the state police because he did not trust the local sheriff. When they finally left, their trucks rumbling back down the access road, I waited another 30 minutes before moving. The sun was setting, painting the Montana sky in shades of orange and purple that seemed obscene given what I had discovered. I ran back to the main house, threw my belongings into my truck, and grabbed the rest of my uncle's documentation from his study. I did not stop driving until I reached the state police headquarters in Helena, 4 hours away. The investigator who took my statement worked through the night, calling in specialists as I showed them the documents and IDs I had taken from the metal building. By dawn, a full tactical team was being assembled to raid the property. The investigation that followed made regional news for weeks. The metal building contained evidence of at least 19 murders over a 7-year period. The operation had involved 4 families who owned neighboring properties, working together to provide disposal services for criminal organizations across 3 states. My uncle had documented enough to connect them to specific cases, but he had waited too long to act. Perhaps afraid, or perhaps simply unable to believe his neighbors were capable of such evil. 3 of the 4 families were arrested within a week. The 4th family, the ones who owned the property with the access road, had fled the day after I went to the police. They were eventually found 6 months later in Mexico, attempting to establish a similar operation there. I never returned to the Montana property. I signed it over to the state as part of the investigation, unable to bear the thought of owning land where such horrors had occurred. The inheritance that should have provided financial security instead provided nightmares that still wake me at 3 in the morning. That specific time when evil men had driven trucks loaded with their sins down a dirt road through the darkness. Sometimes, I wonder what would have happened if I had not found my uncle's documents. If I had simply toured the property superficially and put it up for sale, would they have let me leave? Or would I have become another wrapped shape in those freezer units? Another ID in a box under a desk? Another person who vanished in the vast, empty spaces of the countryside, where no one can hear you scream? The lawyer, Garrett, called me once after everything concluded. He said he had suspected something was wrong, that my uncle had contacted him weeks before his death talking about criminal activity, but refusing to provide details over the phone. Garrett had urged him to go to the police immediately, but my uncle had insisted he needed more proof, absolute certainty before making accusations against families who had been his neighbors for decades. That hesitation killed him, and it nearly killed me. The countryside keeps its secrets well, buried deep in places where civilization never truly reaches. My uncle tried to expose one of those secrets, and it cost him everything. I was simply fortunate enough to be paranoid, observant, and fast enough to escape before becoming another buried secret myself. I live in Seattle again, back to my spreadsheets and client meetings. But I have never looked at rural property the same way. Those empty spaces between towns are not peaceful retreats from modern life. They are territories where different rules apply, where isolation provides cover for the worst impulses of humanity, and where the darkness is literal and metaphorical in equal measure. My uncle's name was Raymond Mitchell. He died trying to seek justice for people no one else was looking for. The state police eventually identified 16 of the 19 victims found on that property. 3 remain unknown, their identities lost, their families never knowing what happened. I think about them sometimes, about the final entry in my uncle's journal. God forgive what I think they have been doing. Now I know, and I will carry that knowledge for the rest of my life. My name is Sophie, and for 3 years, I worked as a marketing consultant in Portland, living in a cramped studio apartment that cost more per month than most people spend on a car payment. I had saved aggressively, cutting every unnecessary expense, eating ramen more nights than I care to admit, all toward a single goal. I wanted to own property, not just own it, but transform it with my own hands. Prove to myself that I could build something tangible in a world increasingly dominated by digital abstractions. When the listing appeared for a farmhouse in rural Oregon, 40 miles outside of Pendleton, I knew immediately it was exactly what I had been searching for. The photographs showed a structure from the 1880s, white clapboard siding weathered to gray, surrounded by overgrown fields and distant mountains. The price was astonishingly low, explained by the real estate agent as a result of its isolated location and the extensive renovation work required. The house had been vacant for nearly a decade, passed through several owners who had started projects but never completed them. I should have asked why so many people had begun and then abandoned their dreams in that house. I should have wondered what made them leave projects half-finished, walls opened and never repaired, floors torn up and left exposed. But I was 28 years old and convinced that determination could overcome any obstacle. I made an offer within hours of viewing the property, and 3 weeks later, I held the keys to my very own disaster. The first month was exactly what I had imagined. I threw myself into the work with an enthusiasm that bordered on obsession. I documented everything on social media, posting photographs of my progress, the grime I was removing, the layers of old wallpaper I was stripping away. My followers loved the transformation narrative. Woman purchases abandoned farmhouse alone, brings it back to life through sheer willpower. It was an inspiring story, the kind that generated hundreds of supportive comments. I started in the dining room because it had the most natural light, and I wanted to create a workspace where I could eat and plan my next renovations. The walls were covered in floral wallpaper that had yellowed with age, peeling in corners where moisture had invaded. Underneath that was another layer, and beneath that another, archaeological evidence of the house's many lives. As I stripped away these layers, the room slowly revealed itself. The original plaster beneath still remarkably intact. It was behind the fourth layer of wallpaper, directly behind where a sideboard must have once stood, that I discovered the cavity. The plaster had been deliberately removed in a section approximately 3 feet wide and 4 feet tall, creating a hollow space between the exterior and interior walls. My first thought was that someone had been looking for pipes or electrical work. But this house predated modern utilities by decades. Shone my work light into the darkness and saw them. Dozens of bird skeletons, arranged in careful patterns on the wooden lath. Small birds mostly, sparrows and finches, their delicate bones positioned to form symbols I did not recognize. Some were arranged in spirals, others in geometric shapes that seemed almost mathematical in their precision. Each skeleton was complete, suggesting the birds had been placed there whole and left to decompose in that hidden space. I am not a superstitious person. I have a degree in business administration. I believe in quantifiable results and logical explanations. So I told myself this was simply evidence of some eccentric previous owner, perhaps someone with an interest in natural history or primitive art. I photographed the arrangement for my records, then carefully removed all the skeletons, placing them in a cardboard box I intended to dispose of properly. That night, sleeping in my camping cot in the living room because the upstairs bedrooms were not yet habitable, I heard the scratching for the first time. It came from inside the walls, a sound like small claws moving across the wood, intermittent and directionless. I assumed mice or rats, common enough in old farmhouses, and made a mental note to purchase traps in the morning. But the scratching did not sound quite like rodent activity. It was too rhythmic, following patterns that seemed almost deliberate. Scratch, 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 pause, scratch, scratch, pause, scratch, scratch, scratch. Over and over, moving through the walls from room to room, as if whatever made the sound was traveling along the interior spaces where birds had once been carefully arranged. I tried to ignore it, pulling my sleeping bag over my head, but the sound penetrated the fabric. And as I lay there, I became aware of another sound beneath the scratching. A soft, repetitive noise that took me several minutes to identify. Breathing. The sound of lungs expanding and contracting, the rush of air through passages coming from the walls themselves. I sat up and the breathing stopped immediately. The scratching ceased. The house fell into perfect silence, the kind of absolute quiet that only exists in places far from civilization. I waited for 5 minutes, listening intently, hearing nothing but my own pulse in my ears. Finally, I lay back down, and within seconds the breathing resumed, synchronizing itself to my own rhythm. When I inhaled, the walls inhaled. When I exhaled, they exhaled with me. I did not sleep that night. When dawn finally arrived, pale light filtering through windows I had not yet cleaned, I convinced myself I had experienced some kind of auditory hallucination brought on by exhaustion. I had been working 12-hour days, breathing dust and chemical stripper fumes, sleeping poorly on a camping cot. Of course, my mind would play tricks. I decided to continue with the renovations, thinking that completing the work would somehow make the house feel less oppressive. I moved to the living room, attacking another wall with my scraper and steamer, tearing away layers of history. Behind the third layer of wallpaper, I found another cavity, larger than the first, and inside were more skeletons. These were not birds, but cats, at least 8 of them, arranged in similar patterns. Their bodies had been positioned with care, legs extended, tails curved, creating shapes that seemed to hold meaning in some language I could not decipher. The sight of them made me physically ill. I ran outside and vomited in the overgrown grass, my body rejecting not just my breakfast, but the fundamental wrongness of what I was uncovering. Someone had sealed animals into these walls deliberately, created a strange architecture of death within the structure of the house itself. This was not the work of eccentric collectors, but something darker, something purposeful. I spent that afternoon researching the property's history at the county clerk's office in Pendleton. The records were incomplete, many documents lost or destroyed over the decades. But I found references to the house's original owner. A woman named Adeline Marsh had lived there from 1887 until her death in 1923. Several newspaper articles from the early 1900s described her as a folk healer, someone local farmers consulted when conventional medicine failed or could not be afforded. One article, printed in 1909, mentioned accusations of witchcraft that were apparently common regarding Marsh. The piece dismissed these as ignorant superstition while noting that Marsh claimed abilities to transfer illness from person to object, creating receptacles for disease that could then be safely contained. The article quoted her as saying, "Sickness has substance, and substance must go somewhere." I began to understand what I had found. Adeline Marsh had believed she could seal illnesses into the walls of her house using animal sacrifice, creating a kind of spiritual architecture where diseases were trapped behind plaster and wallpaper, contained by death and symbol. For 36 years she had practiced this belief, filling her walls with the remains of creatures she considered necessary vessels for human suffering. And I had opened those walls. I had broken the seals, torn away the layers that kept whatever she had trapped inside from escaping. That night, the breathing became impossible to ignore. It filled every room, a constant rhythm that existed independent of my own respiration. I would hold my breath, and the walls continued their cycle, breathing for me, or perhaps breathing their own breath that had been trapped for a century. The sound was wet and labored, like lungs struggling against infection, and it grew louder as the hours passed. I tried to leave my sleeping area to go outside, seeking fresh air and distance from the sound. But as I walked through the dining room, I saw the walls moving, not violently, but subtly, bulging outward as if something pressed against them from within, the plaster flexing with each breath. I touched the wall and felt it warm, fever hot beneath my palm, pulsing with each exhalation. I ran to my truck and drove into Pendleton, checked into a motel, and called a contractor the next morning. I explained that I needed all the walls sealed immediately, the cavities filled with insulation and properly closed. The contractor, a man in his 60s named Tom, listened patiently and then told me about the previous owners. 3 families in the past 10 years had purchased the house. All had begun renovations. All had abandoned the property within months, often leaving in the middle of the night and refusing to return even to collect their possessions. Tom had been called by 2 of them to give estimates, and both times the owners had been visibly afraid, describing experiences they could not explain. Walls that moved, sounds of breathing, the feeling of being watched by something distributed throughout the entire structure. Tom said something that has stayed with me. He said old houses remember what happened in them, and some memories are too powerful to paint over. He said Adeline Marsh had probably saved lives with her folk healing, but the cost of those savings had to go somewhere, and she had chosen to seal that cost into her own home. By opening the walls, I had released what she spent decades containing. I never went back to the house except once, 3 weeks later, in the company of Tom and 2 of his crew. We entered during broad daylight, all of us carrying flashlights though the sun was shining. The house felt different, heavier somehow, as if the air itself had gained mass. We went to collect my belongings, my tools and camping equipment, and the boxes of personal items I had stored in the kitchen. As we gathered my things, I noticed something that stopped me cold. All of my windows were covered in handprints, small handprints the size of a child's, pressed against the glass from the inside. The prints were made in mud or dirt, but there was no mud anywhere inside the house. I had cleaned the floors thoroughly, and the prints were on the interior of the glass, as if something inside had been trying to get out, or perhaps trying to keep me in. Tom saw them too. He said nothing, just helped me carry my belongings to the truck with increased urgency. As we drove away, I looked back at the house and saw the front door standing open, though I knew we had closed it. Through the doorway, I could see into the dining room where I had first discovered the birds, and I swear I saw the walls moving, breathing in and out like the ribs of some massive sleeping creature. The house burned down 2 months later. The fire department determined the cause was undetermined electrical failure, though the house had no electricity connected. By the time firefighters arrived, the structure was fully engulfed, flames climbing into the night sky, visible for miles across the empty countryside. No one tried to save it. The land was eventually sold to a developer who leveled the foundation and left the property vacant. I never told anyone except Tom the complete truth about what I experienced. I let people believe I simply got in over my head with the renovations, that the isolation and workload overwhelmed me. But I know what I found in those walls. And I know what happened when I disturbed what Adeline Marsh had sealed away. Some containers should never be opened. Some seals exist for reasons our modern rational minds cannot comprehend. Adeline Marsh spent 36 years creating a vessel for suffering, filling her walls with sacrifice to protect her community from disease. And when I tore those walls down in my ignorance, seeking to create something beautiful, I released what she had given her life to contain. I live in an apartment in Portland again, same as before, except now I cannot stand to be near old houses. When I see historical homes with their period details and original walls, I wonder what might be sealed inside them, what memories or energies or actual physical things might be waiting in the cavities between layers of plaster and paint. The breathing followed me for months after I left. I would hear it at night in my new apartment, soft and distant but unmistakable. Eventually, it faded, Or perhaps I simply learned to ignore it the way you learn to ignore any constant sound. But sometimes, in that space between waking and sleep, I feel my own breath synchronize with something else. Something that breathes in patterns I recognize from those 3 weeks in that terrible house. I set the fire. I admit that now. I returned in the darkness and poured gasoline through the rooms where I had opened walls, and I lit a match and walked away as the flames took hold. It was the only way to truly seal what I had released, to purify through destruction what could not be contained again. The insurance investigation found no evidence of arson. The property was condemned and demolished. And I carry the knowledge that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for a place that has held too much suffering is to let it burn, to release it from its duty as a vessel, to scatter its ashes across the empty fields and let the wind carry away what should never have been trapped in walls at all. That is my confession. That is what I did to a house in rural Oregon because I thought I could fix it with determination and hard work. Some things are not meant to be fixed, only remembered and avoided, left standing as warnings in the empty places where people no longer venture without good reason. I am Mason, and what I am about to tell you happened during 8 months I spent working in a valley in northern Idaho that does not appear on most maps. I do not mean that metaphorically. When I tried to find it later using GPS coordinates I had saved, the location showed as unmarked wilderness, though I know there were 5 working farms there and approximately 200 people living in houses I ate dinner in and barns I walked through. I had just finished veterinary assistant training in Boise when I received a call from a placement agency about a position in a rural community that desperately needed someone with medical training for livestock. The pay was exceptional, almost twice what similar positions offered, and they provided housing. I was 26, single, and eager to gain experience before applying to full veterinary school. I accepted without asking enough questions. The drive into the valley took 3 hours from the nearest town, following a 2-lane highway that eventually became a dirt road winding between mountains. The valley itself was beautiful in that harsh way remote places can be, surrounded by peaks that caught the late afternoon sun and turned golden. 5 large farms spread across the valley floor, their fields connected in a pattern that suggested cooperation rather than competition. The family who employed me, the Pritchards, welcomed me warmly. They had converted a small cottage on their property into living quarters, simple but comfortable. Mr. Pritchard, a man in his 60s with weathered hands and careful eyes, explained that I would be shared among all 5 families, treating their cattle and horses and other livestock as needed. The families were the Pritchards, the Kelseys, the Warrens, the Bowmans, and the Harrises. Everyone was related by marriage or blood, he said, going back 5 generations in this valley. The work started normally enough. I treated infections, assisted with difficult births, administered vaccines. The families were polite but distant, watching me work with an intensity that made me self-conscious. They had specific ideas about animal care that often contradicted my training. When I suggested modern antibiotics for a cow with mastitis, Mrs. Kelsey looked at me as if I had suggested poison. "We use the old ways here," she said, mixing herbs I did not recognize into a paste she applied to the animal. "The herd knows, the herd provides." I heard that phrase constantly. The herd knows. The herd provides. The herd watches. Always said with reverence, as if they were discussing something sacred rather than farm animals. I assumed it was some kind of rural tradition, a way of expressing respect for the livestock that provided their livelihood. But the animals themselves were strange. Every single head of cattle, every horse, Every sheep across all 5 farms bore the same brand. Not similar brands, but identical. A symbol that looked like 3 intersecting circles, forming a triangle with a vertical line through the center. When I asked about this, Mr. Pritchard explained they were cooperative farmers, sharing bloodlines and resources. The brand represented their unity. What he did not explain was why the same symbol appeared carved into stone markers throughout the valley. I found them in fields, at crossroads, standing alone in clearings. The stones were ancient, weathered by centuries of exposure, clearly predating the settlement of this valley by European farmers. The symbol matched the brand exactly. 2 months into my stay, a woman named Grace, who worked in the Bowman household, approached me after I had finished treating a lame horse. She glanced around nervously before speaking, her voice barely above a whisper. "Do not go into the fields during culling week," she said. "Stay in your cottage. Keep the lights off. Do not look out the windows." Before I could ask what she meant, she walked away quickly, her warning hanging in the air like smoke. I asked Mr. Pritchard about culling week that evening, trying to sound casual. His face hardened. "It is a private tradition," he said. "Family business. You will be given those days off. Best you spend them in town, visit friends, something like that." But I did not have friends in town. I barely knew anyone outside the valley. And his insistence that I leave made me determined to stay and discover what they were hiding. I told him I would remain in the cottage, that I had reading to catch up on. He did not look happy, but he did not argue. Culling week began on a Sunday in early October. All 5 families stopped bringing me animals to treat. The valley became eerily quiet, no vehicles moving between farms, no workers visible in the fields. I stayed in my cottage as promised, but I watched through the windows, noting the unusual stillness. On Tuesday night, I saw the lights. Flashlights and lanterns moving through the fields, converging on the center of the valley where the largest stone marker stood. I counted at least 30 people, entire families walking in procession toward that central point. They moved in silence, no voices carrying across the distance, just the steady progress of lights through the darkness. I made a decision that probably saved my life or ruined it, depending on how you measure such things. I dressed in dark clothing, took my own flashlight, and followed them at a distance, staying to the tree line where shadows would hide my movement. My heart pounded as I crept closer, some instinctive part of my brain screaming that I should turn back, that I was violating something dangerous. When I got close enough to see clearly, I stopped breathing for several seconds. All 30 or so people stood in a circle around the central stone marker, and each wore a mask made from a cattle's skull, the horns still attached, eye sockets hollow in the flickering lantern light. They were chanting in a language I did not recognize, guttural and rhythmic words that seemed to pulse with the earth beneath my feet. In the center of the circle, I saw them. The 5 eldest members of each family standing together, and among them stood one person who did not wear a skull mask. An elderly woman I recognized as Mrs. Warren's mother, who lived with the Warren family. She stood calmly as the chanting grew louder, her hands clasped in front of her, her face peaceful. I realized with creeping horror that this was not a cattle culling. This was something else entirely. The chanting reached a crescendo and then stopped abruptly. In the sudden silence, all the skull-masked figures turned simultaneously to face my direction. Every single one of them. Turning in perfect unison, empty eye sockets pointed directly at the tree line where I crouched. They had known I was there all along. I did not wait to see what happened next. I ran through the trees, branches whipping my face, my flashlight off so they could not track my movement. Behind me, I heard nothing. No pursuit, no voices. Just that terrible silence. I made it back to my cottage, locked the door, and spent the rest of the night sitting with my back against the wall, staring at the entrance. The next morning, I heard the news. Mrs. Warren's mother had passed away in her sleep. Peaceful, natural causes. The family was grieving, but accepting. Death comes to everyone eventually. She had lived a full life. But I had seen her standing in that circle, conscious and aware. Whatever happened after I ran, she had not died in her sleep. I found the symbol carved into my truck door the next day, scratched deep into the metal. The same 3 circles and vertical line. A message, a marking. I went to Mr. Pritchard and gave notice, inventing an excuse about a family emergency. He nodded as if he had expected this. "You are welcome to stay," he said. "You have done good work. The herd appreciates you." "I need to leave," I said, unable to meet his eyes. "Of course." He paused, then added, "But Mason, understand that you were chosen to come here. The agency does not just place people randomly. We asked for you specifically. The herd knows what it needs, and you were needed to see." I packed my belongings and drove out of the valley that afternoon. As I reached the dirt road leading back to the highway, I saw them. All 5 families, 30 people or more, standing along the roadside, watching me leave. They were not threatening, not blocking my path, just witnessing my departure. Grace stood among them, wearing the cattle skull now, the shy woman who had warned me transformed into something else. As I passed the last group, I saw Mr. Pritchard raise his hand in farewell. The gesture seemed almost friendly, almost normal, except for what he said, his voice carrying clearly through my open window. "The herd remembers, Mason. The herd always remembers." I drove for 2 hours before my hands stopped shaking. I have never told anyone this story in full, never reported what I saw to authorities. What would I report? A community that practices some kind of old ritual? People who wear masks and chant in fields they own? Nothing I witnessed was illegal, even if everything about it was wrong. But 6 months after I left the valley, I received a letter at my new address, forwarded through channels I cannot trace. Inside was a single page with a handwritten message. "Your name was spoken at the stone. The herd has marked you as witness. When the time comes, you will know what that means." I have tried to return to that valley once, driving the same route, following the same roads. The turnoff does not exist anymore. The dirt road is gone. When I asked in the nearest town about the families in that valley, people looked at me confused. No families there, they said. No valley with 5 farms. Just wilderness and mountain terrain, too rough for settlement. But I have the symbol carved on my truck door. I have the letter in my desk drawer. And sometimes at night, I hear chanting in a language I do not know, carried on wind that comes from no direction. And I wonder when the herd will call me back to a place that apparently never existed, to witness whatever it is they need witnessed next. That is what happened to me in Idaho, in a valley that does not appear on maps, among people who serve something older than their farms, older than their families, older perhaps than the mountains themselves. They called it the herd. But I think the herd was never about cattle at all. My name is Ava, and I spent 6 months in a research cabin in the Cascade Mountains studying something that scientists call plant communication, but that most people think sounds like pseudoscience. I have a doctorate in botany from UC Berkeley. I have published papers in peer-reviewed journals. I am not prone to flights of imagination or supernatural thinking. What happened to me in that cabin cannot be explained by my training, my education, or my understanding of how the natural world functions. The cabin was positioned at the end of a logging road that had not been maintained in decades, 15 miles from the nearest paved surface, accessible only by four-wheel drive vehicle during the summer months. My research focused on electrical signals between plants, the way they communicate stress and warnings through mycelial networks underground. I needed isolation to conduct experiments without electromagnetic interference from civilization, and this location was perfect. The setup was simple: solar panels for power, rain collection for water, a satellite phone for emergencies, and a ham radio as backup communication. The radio was old, probably from the 1970s, but it worked. I tested it the first day, confirmed I could reach a ranger station 30 miles away, then turned it off. I did not need distractions. The first week passed in the productive solitude I had anticipated. I established my study plots, planted sensors, began collecting baseline data on the lodgepole pine and Douglas fir surrounding the cabin. The work was meticulous and absorbing. I would spend 12 hours in the forest, return exhausted, eat something simple, and collapse into sleep. It was on the 8th night that the radio turned itself on. I woke to static filling the cabin, that familiar white noise of empty frequencies. Half asleep, I assumed I had forgotten to turn it off properly and reached over to switch it off. The static stopped immediately, but something about the pattern stuck in my mind. It had not been random. There had been rhythm to it, almost like speech buried beneath interference. I checked my watch. 2:47 a.m. exactly. I made a note in my research journal, a habit from years of scientific training: document everything, even if it seems irrelevant. Then I went back to sleep. The next night, it happened again. 2:47 a.m. precisely. The radio activated, filled the cabin with static for 16 minutes, then shut off at 3:03 a.m. This time I was awake for the entire duration, listening carefully. The static definitely carried patterns, rises and falls that suggested language, but distorted beyond recognition. I recorded it on my phone, thinking I might analyze the audio later. The third night, I sat in front of the radio at 2:45 a.m., watching it, waiting. At 2:47, the speaker crackled to life without any visible activation. The dial had not moved. The power switch remained in the off position. Yet the static poured out, and this time I heard something beneath it. Numbers. Someone or something counting down in a language I did not recognize. I should explain that I am fluent in English and Spanish, conversational in French, and I have basic reading knowledge of German and Latin for scientific papers. This was none of those. The words were sharp, guttural, structured in ways that hurt to hear, but the numerical pattern was clear, counting backward from what sounded like 100. I began documenting obsessively. Each night the same phenomenon. 2:47 a.m. to 3:03 a.m. Static containing a countdown. I tried disconnecting the radio from its power source. It still activated. I tried removing the batteries. The static continued. I finally wrapped the entire radio in aluminum foil and locked it in a metal storage box. I could still hear it, muffled but persistent, counting down through metal and insulation. My research equipment began malfunctioning on day 12. The sensors I had planted to measure electrical signals in plant roots started displaying readings that made no physical sense. Voltage spikes that should have fried the delicate instruments. Patterns in the data that looked like sine waves, but repeated at intervals matching the radio static. My plants were responding to something, but not to anything I was doing. I went out to check the study plots and stopped dead at the edge of the clearing. The plants had rearranged themselves. That is not the right way to say it, because plants do not move. But the new growth, the stems and leaves that had emerged in the past week, had oriented themselves into geometric patterns, not the natural chaos of forest undergrowth, but deliberate shapes, circles within triangles within squares, repeating across all my study areas. I am a scientist. I looked for explanations, unusual light exposure, gravitropic responses, some kind of hormone signaling I had missed. But nothing in my training covered plants creating geometry overnight, coordinating across dozens of separate individuals to form symbols that looked almost like written language. The countdown on the radio reached what I calculated to be the number 50 on day 20. I had been tracking it, translating the unfamiliar words into numerical values based on their position in the sequence. At this rate, it would reach 0 in 50 more days. I did not want to be there when that happened, but I was contracted for 6 months of data collection, and my funding depended on completing the study. On day 30, I hiked to the old fire lookout tower that stood on a ridge 3 miles from my cabin. The structure had been abandoned since the 1980s, deemed unnecessary after satellite monitoring became standard. The building was locked, windows broken, floor rotted through in places. But something drew me there. A feeling that does not belong in scientific methodology, but that I could not ignore. The door was not just unlocked, but open, swinging gently in the wind. Inside, I found equipment that should not have been functional. Radio gear, monitoring stations, computers with screens displaying data in formats I recognized. My data. The same electrical readings I had been collecting from my plants, displayed in real time on machines that had no power source, in a building that had been abandoned for 40 years. I touched one of the keyboards and the screens changed, showing not my current data, but projections. Predictions of what my research would discover. Graphs of plant communication networks that extended far beyond my study area, encompassing the entire forest, perhaps the entire mountain range. Mathematical models of how information traveled through root systems and fungal connections, but also through something else. Something the models labeled as substrate 0. The radio equipment in the tower activated without my touching it. The same static I had been hearing every night for a month, but clearer here, less distorted. The countdown continued, but now I could hear additional information beneath the numbers. Coordinates, longitude and latitude, but also a third number I did not recognize. Depth maybe, or altitude, or something else entirely. I ran my finger down the list of coordinates displayed on the nearest screen and felt my chest tighten. They matched the locations of my study plots exactly. The plots I had selected at random, or so I thought, based on accessibility and tree density. But here they were, predetermined on equipment that predated my arrival by decades. The countdown reached 0 on day 72. I know this because I woke up at 2:47 a.m. as I had every night, and the static was different. Instead of continuing the sequence, every electronic device I owned activated simultaneously. My laptop, my phone, my research equipment, the cabin lights, everything powered on and displayed the same image. A symbol. 3 intersecting circles forming a pattern that matched exactly the geometry my plants had grown into. I went outside and used my flashlight to scan the forest. What I saw will stay with me until I die. The trees themselves had rearranged, not individual trees, but the canopy, the way branches interlocked, the spaces between trunks. From the ground, it looked like forest. But from above, if you could see the pattern, it would form that same symbol, massive encompassing acres. The growth required to create that pattern should have taken decades. It had happened in 72 days, time to coincide with the countdown I had been documenting. The forest had been listening to the same signal I was hearing, responding to instructions I could not comprehend, transforming itself into something that looked like language, or perhaps was language, written in timber and foliage. I left the next morning, abandoning my research, my equipment, 6 months of funding. I drove out of those mountains and filed a report with my university that I knew would destroy my credibility. Equipment malfunction, I said. Data corruption, personal health issues requiring immediate departure. They accepted my resignation from the research project without much argument. Graduate students are cheaper anyway. But I kept copies of my data, the recordings of the static, photographs of the geometric patterns in plant growth. I have tried to analyze them using every tool available to botanical science. Nothing explains what I documented. The patterns are there, undeniable, but their purpose or meaning remains beyond my understanding. I still hear the static sometimes at 2:47 a.m., no matter where I am. I have moved twice, changed cities, thrown away every electronic device I owned in that cabin. It does not matter. The signal finds me. Though now it is different. No countdown. Just a steady tone, like a homing beacon or perhaps a marker, identifying me as someone who heard something I was not meant to hear and saw something I was not meant to see. I have stopped doing fieldwork. I teach now undergraduates in introductory botany courses. I show them how to measure photosynthesis and identify leaf structures. I do not tell them that plants might be communicating with something we cannot detect, responding to signals that predate human understanding of radio waves, growing into patterns that suggest intelligence beyond anything our models of life can accommodate. The fire lookout tower burned down 3 months after I left. Lightning strike, according to the fire marshal's report. Though there had been no storms in the area that week. I think about the equipment inside, the data displays, the coordinates. I think about what was counting down and what happened when it reached 0. I think about the forest rearranging itself into symbols no one will see unless they look from above. And I wonder what message was written there, and who or what was meant to read it. My name is Ava Reynolds. I have a doctorate in botany. I do not believe in the supernatural. But I know the forest was listening to something, and I know I heard it too. And I know that whatever transmitted that signal has been doing so for at least 40 years, possibly longer, from a source I cannot locate using any instrument I possess. That is my account of what happened in the Cascade Mountains. That is why I will never return to remote field research. And that is why I check every radio I encounter, just in case I hear that specific pattern of static again, the sound of something counting down toward an event I witnessed but cannot explain. I am Hunter, and I moved to a cottage in rural Vermont in the spring of 2023 after what my therapist called a severe depressive episode, and what I called a complete breakdown of my ability to function in normal society. I had worked in finance in Boston for 7 years, and one Tuesday morning, I simply could not force myself to go to the office. I sat in my apartment, staring at the wall for 3 days until a colleague came to check on me. The doctor prescribed medication and rest, and my parents found me the cottage, a place where I could heal in isolation and quiet. The property was perfect for someone seeking escape. 2 acres of overgrown lawn surrounded by pine forest, a single-story house with just enough room for one person, and most importantly, distance from everything. The nearest town was 8 miles away. My only neighbor was a woman named Chloe, who owned the adjacent farm, her house visible across a fallow field that separated our properties by about 200 yards. For the first month, I barely saw Chloe. I glimpsed her occasionally walking from her house to one of her outbuildings, but we never spoke beyond a brief wave. That distance was exactly what I needed. No obligations, no conversations, no pressure to be anything other than a person trying to remember how to exist without constant anxiety. I spent my days reading, walking in the woods, cooking simple meals. My therapist called twice a week to check my progress. I told her I was improving, which was mostly true. The medication was helping. The silence was helping. But I was developing a new habit that I did not mention to her because I knew how it would sound. I had started watching Chloe. It began innocently enough. I would sit on my porch in the evening with a book, and I would notice Chloe working in her field. She would be out there with a shovel, digging, always digging. At first, I thought she was gardening, preparing the soil for planting. But as weeks passed, I realized she was not planting anything. She would dig holes, stand looking at them for several minutes, then fill them back in. This struck me as odd, but people in the countryside do things that seem strange to city dwellers. Maybe she was testing the soil. Maybe she was looking for something. I tried to dismiss my curiosity, but it kept pulling my attention. I found myself checking the windows throughout the day, just to see if Chloe was in the field. I purchased binoculars, telling myself they were for bird watching. The woods around my cottage hosted dozens of species I wanted to observe and identify. That justification lasted about 3 days before I admitted to myself that I had bought them to watch my neighbor. Through the binoculars, I could see details I had missed before. Chloe worked her field at all hours, sometimes at 3 in the morning, sometimes at dawn, sometimes during the day. She followed a pattern, creating holes in a grid-like arrangement that covered the entire field over the course of several weeks. Each hole was roughly the same size, about 3 feet deep and 2 feet wide. She would dig, stand at the edge looking down for exactly 2 minutes, then fill it back in and move to the next location. I started keeping a log. I am not proud of this, but the structure of documentation gave me something to focus on, a reason to get out of bed. I would note the times Chloe went outside, which section of the field she worked in, how long she spent at each location. My journal filled with observations written in the careful handwriting of someone with too much time and too little purpose. Week 6. I realized I was spending 8 to 10 hours a day watching Chloe. I would position myself at different windows to maintain line of sight as she moved around her property. I stopped reading. I forgot to eat meals. The watching had become the primary structure of my days, more important than sleep or basic self-care. My therapist asked how I was spending my time. I told her I was pursuing a new interest in agriculture and land management, researching farming techniques. This was not entirely a lie. I had begun researching what Chloe might be doing, reading about soil composition testing, archaeological surveys, land preparation methods. Nothing I found explained her behavior. Week 8. I made a decision that crossed a line I knew I should not cross. I waited until Chloe's house went dark, until I was certain she was asleep. Then I walked across the field to examine the holes she had been digging. I brought a flashlight and a measuring tape, telling myself I was conducting my own research. The field was dotted with filled-in depressions where Chloe had worked. I selected one near the center and began digging, following the outline of the most recent excavation. The soil came away easily, already loosened by her earlier work. At 3 feet down, my shovel struck something that was not earth, I knelt and cleared the soil carefully with my hands. Plastic. A bundle wrapped in black plastic sheeting, sealed with tape that cracked when I tried to pull it. Inside was clothing, old and rotted, alongside what looked like bone fragments. I could not tell if they were human or animal bones. But the clothing was definitely human size, adult size, a flannel shirt mostly disintegrated by moisture and time. I covered the hole immediately, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the shovel. When I looked up, Chloe was standing at the edge of the field, motionless, watching me. She held a shovel across her shoulders, her silhouette backlit by the distant porch light of her house. Neither of us moved. We stood perhaps 50 feet apart, two people in a dark field, one who had been digging and one who had discovered what was buried. Finally, Chloe spoke, her voice carrying clearly in the night silence. "I see you watching. Every day. Every night." My throat was too dry to respond. I wanted to run, but my legs would not move. "I watch you too," she continued, walking slowly toward me. "You think you are the only one with binoculars? You think I do not notice the man in the window, staring at me for hours?" She stopped 10 feet away, close enough that I could see her face. She was smiling, but it was not a friendly expression. It was the smile of someone who had been waiting for this moment. "I know your schedule, Hunter. I know you wake up at 8:30 most days. I know you have coffee on the porch at 9, Yaoshu. I know you skip lunch but eat dinner at 6, Gyaos, usually pasta or soup. I know you sleep with the bedroom light on because you are afraid of the dark. I know everything about you because I have been watching you watch me." She described my life in detail, things no one should know. Where I kept my journal, what medications I took, the name of my therapist. She had been in my house somehow, or she had been watching with equipment far better than my cheap binoculars, learning my habits with the same obsessive attention I had given to her movements. "You want to know what I'm digging for?" Chloe said, gesturing at the field around us. "I am not digging for anything. I am checking. These holes existed before I bought this property. Someone else filled this field with their secrets, and I spend my time making sure those secrets stay buried. And you, neighbor, have just disturbed one." She turned and walked back toward her house, leaving me standing alone with my shovel and my fear. Before she reached her porch, she called back without looking at me. "Go home, Hunter. Lock your doors, and understand that we are the same now. You watch me, I watch you. We know each other's secrets. We keep each other's secrets. That is how neighbors survive in places like this." I went back to my cottage and did exactly what she said. I locked every door and window. I sat in my living room with the lights on, knowing that she could see me, that she was probably watching, and I realized the horrible truth. I had become obsessed with watching Chloe to the point where my own life had become transparent. I had been so focused on observing her that I never noticed I had become the observed. For 3 nights, neither of us slept. I would stand at my window looking at her house, and she would stand at her window looking back at mine. 2 people trapped in mutual surveillance, each afraid to look away first, each knowing too much about the other. On the 4th day, I packed my belongings and left. I drove back to Boston and found a new apartment and resumed therapy with increased frequency. When my therapist asked what happened, I told her I had realized that isolation was not good for me, that I needed to be around people again. But that was not the truth. The truth was, I could not live across from Chloe knowing that she was a mirror of what I had become. The watching, the obsession, the documentation of another person's life. These were not symptoms of her being dangerous. They were symptoms of both of us being isolated and damaged, and looking for any kind of connection, even if that connection was through surveillance and secrets. I never reported what I found in that field. I never told police about the plastic-wrapped bundle or the bones, because doing so would require explaining how I knew they were there, would require admitting that I had spent 2 months obsessively watching my neighbor, documenting her activities, trespassing on her property to investigate holes she had been methodically checking. Who was the monster in that story? The woman maintaining buried secrets on property she owned? Or the man who watched her every movement with binoculars, who kept detailed logs of her schedule, who violated her privacy in ways that would have terrified him if someone did them to him? I still think about Chloe sometimes. I wonder if she is still out there in that field, digging her holes, checking what is buried. I wonder if she still watches my old cottage, looking for the next occupant, the next person who might spend their days staring across that fallow field. And I wonder what she saw in me during those 2 months, what my behaviors looked like from her perspective. A strange man who never left his property, who appeared at windows at all hours, who pointed binoculars at her house repeatedly. If I am honest, I would have been terrified of me. The horror was not what was buried in the field. The horror was what isolation and obsession did to both of us, how we turned each other into objects to be studied rather than people to be known. That is what happens when you move to the countryside seeking escape. You bring your damage with you. And sometimes you find it reflected in the windows of the nearest house, staring back at you across an empty field. My name is Jackson, and I have been a commercial delivery driver for 8 years, the kind who handles overnight routes bringing supplies to farms and rural businesses too far from distribution centers for standard shipping services. I know the back roads of Wyoming, Montana, and Idaho better than most people know their own neighborhoods. I can navigate by landmarks invisible to GPS systems, anticipate weather by the way light hits certain mountain peaks, and judge road conditions by the sound my tires make on different surfaces. What I am saying is that I am not someone who gets lost, which is why what happened to me in November makes no sense according to any rational understanding of geography or physics. The delivery was routine, a standing monthly order for a ranch 60 miles outside of Dubois, Wyoming. I had made this exact run more than 100 times over the years, always taking Highway 287 north, then turning onto County Road 418 at mile marker 47, following that for 12 miles through increasingly remote terrain until I reached the Morrison Ranch. The route was so familiar I could drive it half asleep, which on overnight deliveries I sometimes nearly did. I left the highway at mile marker 47 at 11:30 p.m. on a clear November night. The moon was nearly full, providing enough light to see the landscape beyond my headlights, the familiar roll of hills and scattered pine groves. I had driven maybe 3 miles when I noticed something felt wrong, a sensation I cannot adequately describe. The road looked correct, the same asphalt surface I had traveled countless times, but the proportions seemed slightly off. Distances between landmarks felt longer or shorter than they should be. I checked my GPS out of habit, even though I knew the route by memory. The screen showed me on County Road 418, the blue line tracking my position exactly where it should be. But the landmarks were wrong. A barn that should have been painted red appeared gray in my headlights. A fence line that ran parallel to the road for 2 miles seemed to angle away differently. Small discrepancies that I told myself were tricks of moonlight or fatigue. At mile 8, where a cluster of 3 cottonwood trees marked a curve in the road, I saw instead a single dead pine. I slowed down, confused, checking my odometer. 8 miles from the turnoff, exactly where those cottonwoods should be. But the tree was wrong, The curve was wrong. Even the texture of the road surface seemed different under my tires. I continued driving, my unease growing with each mile. At 12 miles, where the Morrison Ranch should have appeared, I found instead a property I had never seen before. The house was there, positioned approximately where the ranch house should be, but the structure was completely different. Victorian style, 3 stories, with a wraparound porch. Not the sprawling single-story ranch house I had delivered to the previous month. I pulled into the driveway, thinking perhaps I had somehow gotten turned around despite the GPS showing I was in the correct location. The house number on the mailbox read 4782, the correct address. But this was not the Morrison Ranch. I got out of my truck, walked to the front door, and knocked, planning to ask for directions or at least clarification about where I actually was. The door swung open under my knock, not locked, moving slowly inward to reveal a furnished interior that looked like a museum display. Everything was vintage, authentic 1970s decor. Avocado green appliances in the kitchen visible from the entry. Orange and brown patterned wallpaper, shag carpeting. A calendar hung on the wall near the telephone, and my flashlight beam illuminated the date. November 1974, 50 years in the past. I backed out of the house quickly, my heart rate accelerating. This had to be some kind of historical preservation property, or maybe a movie set. But why would it exist at the exact coordinates of the Morrison Ranch, bearing the same address? I returned to my truck and checked my phone. No signal, which was not unusual in this remote area. But the clock on my phone displayed 11:43 p.m., the same time it had been when I first noticed something was wrong. I had been driving for at least 20 minutes since then, but my phone insisted no time had passed. I got back on the road, heading in the direction I had been traveling, thinking I would continue until I found something recognizable. The road stretched ahead in the moonlight, and I drove for what felt like another 12 miles, checking my odometer constantly. At 24 miles from the original turnoff, I should have been 12 miles past the Morrison Ranch, deep into territory I knew well. Instead, I found myself approaching a property with a house that looked familiar. It was the same Victorian house I had just left, positioned at the same location, with the same mailbox displaying 4782. I had somehow looped back to the same place, despite driving in a straight line down a road that had no turns. I did not stop this time. I kept driving, pushing my speed higher, watching the odometer climb. 36 miles from the turnoff, 48 miles, 60 miles. And then, impossibly, there was the Victorian house again, appearing in my headlights as if I had never left it. Same location, same angle, same everything. I pulled over and sat in my truck cab, forcing myself to think rationally. Roads do not loop like this. You cannot drive in a straight line and arrive repeatedly at the same point unless you are on a circular track. And County Road 418 was a linear route between 2 points. I checked the GPS again, and it showed me moving forward along the road, the blue line extending farther with each iteration, showing I had traveled nearly 70 miles from the highway. But the landscape kept repeating, or I kept returning, or space itself had folded in some way my experience could not accommodate. On my fourth approach to the Victorian house, I stopped and went inside again, searching for anything that might explain what was happening. The interior was exactly as I had seen it before, frozen in 1974. I found photographs on the mantel showing a family, parents, and 2 children, all dressed in styles from that era. In one photograph, I could see through the window behind them, and the view showed the landscape I recognized, the correct landmarks in their proper positions. I took that photograph with me and returned to my truck. I decided to try something different. Instead of continuing forward, I put the truck in reverse and began backing down the road. I drove backward for 6 miles, according to my odometer. And when I finally turned around, I found myself on a completely different road. The landscape had changed. The landmarks were wrong in new ways. A stream that should not exist cut across the terrain to my left. Mountains that should be distant appeared closer. I kept driving, no longer caring about the direction, just trying to find anything that matched my memory of reality. And then, approximately mile marker 47, I saw it. The turnoff onto County Road 418, the exact spot where I had left the highway hours earlier. Except now I was approaching it from the opposite direction, coming from where the Morrison Ranch should be toward the highway, despite having never turned around. I took the turnoff, and suddenly everything was correct again. The landmarks matched their expected positions. The barn was red. The fence line ran parallel. The 3 cottonwood trees marked the curve exactly where they should be. At 12 miles, the Morrison Ranch appeared. The correct single-story house I had delivered to dozens of times before. I pulled into the driveway, and a woman came out to meet me. Her name was Maya Morrison, the ranch owner, someone I had spoken with many times over the years. She looked at me with concern and asked if I was all right, said I looked pale. I asked her how long she had owned this property. 30 years, she said. Built it myself in 1995. Why? I described the Victorian house I had seen, the 3-story structure with the porch and vintage interior. Her face lost color. That is my grandmother's house, she said slowly. Or it was. She lived here, right here where we are standing, from 1950 until it burned down in 1974. I have photographs of it. But the house you are describing, I have never seen it. I was not born until after the fire. She invited me inside and showed me a photo album. There was the Victorian house, exactly as I had seen it, positioned on the same plot of land where her current ranch house stood. The same wraparound porch, the same architectural details. In some photos, I could see the interior, the same avocado appliances and orange wallpaper. I told her about driving in loops, about returning to the same location repeatedly despite moving forward. She listened without interrupting, and when I finished, she said something I will never forget. My grandmother died in that fire, Maya said quietly. The official report said she fell asleep smoking a cigarette. But my father always said there was something strange about this land, that sometimes it does not follow normal rules. He said his mother knew about it, that she had experienced things she could not explain. He said that is why she stayed here, not despite the strangeness, but because of it. She was studying it, documenting it, trying to understand why this location sometimes showed different versions of itself. Maya went to a closet and pulled out a box of her grandmother's papers. Journals filled with accounts similar to mine. Multiple entries describing the road that looped, the landmarks that shifted, the sense that geography itself was flexible here. Her grandmother had documented dozens of occurrences, sometimes experiencing them herself, sometimes hearing accounts from others who had gotten lost in ways that defied explanation. The final entry in the journal was dated November 14th, 1974, the night of the fire. It read simply, "The house is shifting again. I can see both versions now, the one I live in and the one that will replace it. Some roads only appear when they need to, and some places exist in multiple times simultaneously. Tonight, I think the versions are going to collapse together, and I am not certain which one I will end up in. I left the Morrison Ranch at 3 a.m., my delivery completed, though I had lost more than 3 hours to whatever had happened on that road." When I reported back to my dispatcher, he had no record of the time loss. According to his logs, I had made the delivery in the expected time frame, arriving and departing at normal intervals. I have driven that route 6 more times since November, and each trip has been completely normal. The road goes where it should. The landmarks appear in their correct positions, and I reach the Morrison Ranch in exactly 12 miles. But I keep that photograph I took from the Victorian house, the one showing Maya's grandmother's family. And sometimes I look at it and wonder about roads that only appear when they need to, about places that exist in multiple times at once. I met Maya for coffee last month in Dubois. She told me she had been reading more of her grandmother's journals and had found something disturbing. Multiple people had reported similar experiences on County Road 418 over the decades, always on nights near the anniversary of the fire. And in every case, those people described seeing the Victorian house occupied, lights on, calendar showing 1974, as if that night was still happening somewhere. Repeating endlessly, waiting for something or someone. Maya asked me if I thought her grandmother was still there, trapped in some version of November 14th, 1974, living and reliving the night the fire took her. I did not have an answer. But I think about it every time I make that delivery run. Wonder if the road will fold again, if I will find myself driving in impossible loops, arriving repeatedly at a house that burned 50 years ago, but somehow still exists, frozen in time, waiting at the intersection of County Road 418, and whatever lies beyond our normal understanding of how places work. My name is Jackson Reed, and I have driven commercial delivery routes for 8 years. I know these roads better than anyone. But I also know that sometimes roads do not go where they are supposed to go. And sometimes the journey reveals that the map we trust is only one version of a territory that refuses to hold a single shape. My name is Leo, and in the spring of 2022, I made a decision that seemed reasonable at the time, but that has destroyed my ability to trust my own perception of reality. I am a photographer, or I was, specializing in landscape and portraiture work that paid well enough, but left me feeling creatively empty. I wanted to do something meaningful, something that would force me to confront myself rather than simply capture surfaces. I found a farmhouse to rent in rural Nebraska, 40 miles from the nearest town, nothing around except fields and sky, and a silence so complete it felt like pressure against my eardrums. My plan was simple. I would document myself for 1 full year, taking the exact same photograph every single day. Same location, same pose, same camera settings. The only variable would be me, how I changed over seasons and months, how isolation and introspection would transform me in ways I could measure and study. I set up the shot carefully. A wooden tripod positioned in the field behind the farmhouse. Camera mounted and aimed at a spot I marked with a stone. I would stand on that stone, face the camera, and use the 10-second timer to capture the image. Every day at 4 p.m., regardless of weather, I would take that photograph. It would be a meditation on time and self, a year compressed into 365 images that would reveal truths invisible in any single frame. Day 1, I was excited, standing in spring sunshine, smiling slightly at the camera I would come to know better than my own reflection. Day 3, I reviewed the first images on my laptop and noticed something odd. In the background of the day, 2 photographs, behind me and slightly to the left near the tree line, there was a figure, distant, blurred by depth of field, barely visible but definitely there. A human shape standing among the trees. I told myself it was nothing. A trick of light and shadow. the natural human tendency to see faces and figures in random patterns. I had been alone on the property. No one could have been there. I continued the project, but I began reviewing each photograph immediately after taking it, checking for the figure. It appeared sporadically. Day 4, nothing. Day 5, there it was again. Closer this time. Still blurry, but definitely nearer than before. Day 6 and 7, absent. Day 8, present and close enough that I could make out general proportions. Human height, similar build to my own, wearing what looked like the same clothing I had worn that day. I started taking test photographs, shooting dozens of frames before and after the official 4 p.m. image. The figure never appeared in any photograph where I manually pressed the shutter button. Only when I used the timer function, only in that 10-second gap between setting the shot and hearing the click, did the figure manifest in the captured image. I was beginning to understand that whatever I was photographing existed only in that brief temporal space. The delay between intention and execution. Week 3, I became obsessed. I stopped caring about documenting my transformation over the year. The project had become about the figure, about capturing it clearly enough to understand what it was. I changed lenses, used faster shutter speeds, adjusted aperture. Nothing helped. The figure remained perpetually blurred, always slightly out of focus, even when the rest of the frame was sharp. By week 6, I noticed something that made my hands shake so badly I could barely operate the camera. The figure was not just getting closer, it was mimicking me. When I stood with my arms at my sides, the figure stood the same way. When I crossed my arms, the figure crossed its arms. But the mimicry was delayed, happening 2 or 3 seconds after my movement, as if the figure was learning my gestures by watching and copying them. I set up a video camera on a separate tripod, running continuously during my daily photograph session. I thought if I captured video of the entire process, I could prove to myself that no one was actually standing in the field, that the figure was some kind of post-processing artifact or camera malfunction. When I reviewed the video footage, my rational understanding of photography and physics collapsed completely. The video showed me setting up the shot, showed me walking to my marked position, showed the timer counting down. And it showed the figure. Not in the trees, but standing in the open field, just outside my peripheral vision, matching my movements with that slight delay. The figure was real, physical, casting a shadow, disturbing the grass as it moved. It was there, inches away from me sometimes, and I had never seen it while it was happening. Only the camera could see it in the moment. Only my eyes could miss it entirely. I watched myself on that video, standing still and focused on the camera ahead, while the figure stood so close behind me that it could have touched my shoulder. I watched the figure turn its head, studying me, learning the angle of my posture and the set of my shoulders. And I realized with creeping horror that every day for 6 weeks, I had been standing in an empty field with something I could not perceive, something that was using me as a template, copying not just my movements, but perhaps something deeper. Week 8. The video footage became stranger. The figure now mimicked my movements with almost no delay, synchronizing itself to my gestures in real time. And its face, which had always been blurred or turned away, was becoming clearer in the photographs. It resembled me, but wrong, like a sculpture made by someone who had only briefly seen a human being and was guessing at the details. I stopped taking the daily photographs. I stayed inside the farmhouse for 3 days, watching through windows, afraid to go into the field. But on the 4th day, I could not resist. I had to know if the figure would appear without me. if it needed my presence to exist or if it had become independent. I set up the camera on the timer and ran back to the house, watching from a window as the shutter clicked. Later, I reviewed the image and felt my throat close. The figure was standing in my spot, in the exact position where I should have been, facing the camera. I was not in the photograph at all. The figure had replaced me entirely. That night, I could not sleep. I kept thinking about the timer, about the gap between setting the camera and the shutter release, about what existed in those 10 seconds that was different from every other moment. I had created a ritual, a daily repetition that somehow opened a space for something else to enter, to watch and learn, and eventually to take my place in the frame. I decided to take one final photograph, one last attempt to understand what I had documented. I set up the camera with the timer, but this time I stood behind the camera position, watching the field and the marked spot where I usually stood. I wanted to see if the figure would appear without me occupying the frame. The timer counted down. 10 seconds. 9, 8. At 5 seconds, I saw it. The figure materialized on my marked spot, facing the camera, standing in the pose I had used for 8 weeks. It was wearing my clothes from that day, the same jacket and jeans I had on at that moment. And as the shutter clicked, the figure turned its head toward me, toward my actual position behind the camera, and I saw its face clearly for the first time. It was my face. Not similar, not approximate, but exactly my face, with perfect detail. And the expression it wore was not curiosity or menace, but profound confusion, as if it was just as surprised to see me as I was to see it. I ran. I abandoned the camera, the tripod, the entire project. I got in my car and drove away from that farmhouse without even packing my belongings. I drove for 6 hours straight, not stopping until I reached Denver. And I checked into a hotel and sat on the bed trying to understand what had happened. Over the next week, I developed a theory. Horrible and impossible, but the only explanation that fit the evidence. The timer had been creating a split, a brief discontinuity where 2 versions of the present moment existed simultaneously. The version where I pressed the button and walked to my position, and the version captured by the camera. And in that gap, something had been learning to exist in both versions at once. But here is what truly terrifies me. I do not know which version is real. Am I the Leo who ran away from the farmhouse? Or am I the figure who learned to mimic him so perfectly that I inherited his memories and fear? The gap between setting the timer and hearing the click had been 10 seconds. 10 seconds repeated daily for 8 weeks. How many Leos might have existed in those cumulative hours of split time? And which one am I? I see it now sometimes in reflections, the slight delay. I move my hand, and my mirror image follows a fraction of a second too slow. I speak, and I hear my voice echo in a way that does not match the acoustics of the room. My shadow falls at an angle that does not correspond to the light source. Small discrepancies that suggest I am not synchronized properly with the world around me, as if I exist 2 or 3 seconds out of phase with everything else. I went back to the farmhouse once, 3 months later, to retrieve my equipment. The landlord was there, cleaning the property for new tenants. He said I had left the camera running, that it had filled the memory card with thousands of images, all taken automatically at 4 p.m. every day since I left. He showed me some of the photographs on the camera's display screen. Every single image showed the figure standing in my spot, facing the camera, wearing different clothes in each frame as if documenting its own daily changes. The project had continued without me, or perhaps it continued because the real me had never left. Because I was the figure that learned to replace myself so completely that I inherited the ability to run away and remember being someone else. I destroyed the camera. I smashed it with a rock and burned the memory card and scattered the pieces across 3 different dumpsters in 3 different cities. But I kept one photograph, the last one I took before I ran, the image where the figure is turning to look at me with my own face wearing an expression of mutual confusion. I keep it because I need to remember that I might not be real, that I might be the copy that became so perfect it forgot it was copying anything at all. And sometimes I feel that 10-second gap again, that space between intention and action, where something else can slip in and take your place while you are busy becoming yourself. My name is Leo Harrison. I am a photographer. I documented myself for 8 weeks before something went wrong with the project. Or maybe I am the documentation itself, the image that learned to move and speak and fear. And the real Leo is still standing in that field, waiting for the timer to finish counting down, waiting to see what happens when the shutter finally clicks and freezes him in a moment he will never escape. I no longer take photographs. I no longer trust mirrors or shadows or any surface that shows me who I am supposed to be. Because I know now that the self is not a constant thing, but a process that can be interrupted, copied, replaced by something that looks and acts and remembers exactly the same, but exists 2 or 3 seconds out of sync with the truth. That is what happened to me in Nebraska, in a field behind a farmhouse where I tried to document transformation and instead documented replacement. And I will never know for certain which side of the camera I really belonged on, which version of me was original and which was the delayed echo that learned to believe it was real.